The events and named characters in this story are loosely based off of real historical figures, namely Takezaki Suenaga, as portrayed in his picture scroll, which was translated and annotated in the book In Little Need of Divine Intervention by Thomas D.Conlan. Suenaga was a notable gokenin, or warrior vassal to a feudal lord, in some cases serving under another retainer who then answered to that lord. These days, this class is referred to by the more popular term samurai. Suenaga is noteworthy as he was one of the gokenin who kept the most extensive records of his adventures and exploits and survived both Mongol invasions in 1274 and 1281 AD. After the wars, he had picture scrolls commissioned to display his interactions with others and his glorious deeds in battle. Despite the popular image of samurai being driven by honor and loyalty, like most warriors of the day, his motive was largely selfish. He wanted to be recorded as going first into battle for personal gain in both fame and fortune. In reality, he was a bold man who was not afraid to commit insubordination if he thought it would give him a better chance at political and financial gain. He was not really delusional, as I hint at in this story, but he was headstrong and belligerent, so it wouldn't be hard to imagine him pretending to have divine powers from defeating two demigods, if he thought it would bring him a better payout in the end. So without further ado, Part 1 of Inventing Divine Intervention by Alexander Martin.
Takezaki Korohyo as Suenaga knew that he was raggedly handsome. He knew that he was strong as the boar, swift as the deer, wily as the tanuki, and brave as the badger. He was tenacious as the pygmy shrew. All the other boys in his clan looked up to him. They literally looked up to him. They had to, because he towered 3 heads taller than the tallest of them. He knew all of this to be true, even if none of his father's retainers would acknowledge it. At 29 years of age, he had long since become his own man, and that meant keeping his family in high standing with their clan. So, when word arrived that the vile Mongol hordes were amassing their forces and preparing an invasion of his beloved homeland, Suenaga was incensed. Suenaga heard of this, and rent his raiment in anguish and rage. He rent his kimono, he rent his hakama, he rent his katakino and the juba that were still piled high in the wicker basket set beside the door. Suddenly it dawned on Suenaga that he no longer had any clothes left intact despite his impending meeting with the daimyo and his advisors to discuss solutions to the pirate problem, as it had been dubbed by the Bakufu. There wasn't nearly enough time for him to have a new wardrobe made, but Suenaga knew one other thing about this meeting. He knew that it was this meeting which would be the deciding factor in selecting which of their fine fighting men would lead the charge into battle. Which of them would be granted the glorious position of Grand Field Marshal General, representative of His Highness, the Emperor of Japan, and most importantly, which of them would be granted the hundreds of bushels of rice, crates of gold bullion, rolls upon rolls of fine silk brocade, and the hundreds of hectares of land. Good land, with rich soil for tilling, and plenty of sniveling peasants to work the land for him. So Suenaga thought. He thought, and he planned, and he schemed. He pondered what to do for the next hour until he had to set out toward the meeting hall. On his way there, he noted his disheveled appearance reflected in a mirror. His clothes were torn and frayed. His once-neat topknot sat askew, and strands of hair blew free in the air. By all appearances, he had just come from a fight. A long, drawn-out and hard-won fight. It was in that moment that Suenaga realized what had happened and from whence he was truly coming. Suenaga realized that the wind which whipped at his torn clothing was none other than Fujin. The wind spirit had accosted him, and he had been able to fend it off. Nay, he had conquered it. He had bested it in a no-holds-barred battle until he had finally pinned it to the ground. Suenaga staggered in shock as he realized what had just occurred. He had fought a god. He had fought Fujin and came out the unquestionable victor. As he stumbled under the weight of what he had done, he tripped on a loose waraji and fell backward, with a lamp directly beneath him. Flames licked at his back, scarring his flesh and charring the silk of his kimono. Suenaga cried out in agony and rage. He spun around wildly, catching the lamp with his sword and cleaving it in twain. White-hot rage seethed from within him at the pain, and he once again beheld his reflection. Fujin had not been alone. As always, Fujin had been followed by his partner Raijin, who had attempted to strike Suenaga down in an act of vengeance. But Suenaga had survived the cowardly strike at his back, taken a blow and absorbed its energy. Then, howling in rage, he had pummeled Raijin into submission. Heaving at the exertion of his newly formed memory, Suenaga marched purposefully toward the daimyo's keep. Takezaki Korahyo and Suenaga could feel the weight of their stares as he entered the council chambers, wooden doors smacking loudly into their frames. Men, young and old, gawked at him with unmasked incredulity as he proudly marched toward the dais where the daimyo and his advisors were gathered to deliberate on the candidates, all of whom had already presented their cases. He could hear their judgmental whispers and smirked at their disdain for his disheveled appearance and lack of decorum. He scoffed as he sauntered past them. All of these pretty young men were only playing at being warriors. He had fought and bested 2 gods this very morning. Could any of them claim that? No, they could not. Suenaga would not be mocked. He would not be cowed. He would take his rightful place as the Grand Field Marshal General and gain fame and fortune in the heat of battle. At his approach, the daimyo held up his hand for quiet, and the council chamber stilled. The ancient man beckoned for Suenaga to come closer, which he did without hesitation.
"You are late, Takezaki-sama,"
the ancient governor intoned in a raspy voice.
"We were beginning to worry that something had happened to you along the way."
Sneakers arose from the gallery at this.
"It would appear that our concerns for you were not entirely unfounded."
Suenaga bowed politely before speaking up with a voice overflowing with conviction. "Friends and brothers, hearken unto me," he belted out. "When I left my manor some hours ago, I was treated to a magnificent sight, the likes of which I had never seen before." He paused dramatically, then took an exaggeratedly large step forward and struck a pose. "Fujin! He appeared before me in a gust of wind and attempted to block my path. I had no intention to be stopped by this belligerent being, so I warned him not to impede my path, lest I strike him down in my wrath." As he said this, Suenaga twisted himself into an absurdly wide fighting stance, screwing his face into a fierce snarl. He beat at me with gale-force blasts as I grappled with him. He wrapped his arms in a circle in front of him, as if grabbing a large opponent, then flipped his torso backwards, landing on his hands in an arch, suplexing his invisible opponent and shouting, "Until I drove his head into the earth, and he stirred no more." A gasp of astonishment erupted from the gallery, and whispers could be heard flowing like waves throughout those assembled. Suenaga heaved himself back to his feet and struck a heroic pose, left arm extended and right hand drawn back so his hand lay near his chin. "But suddenly," he rejoined, silencing all those in attendance and drawing all eyes and ears back to his tail. "Betrayal!" he shouted, and pitched himself forward onto his hands and his knees. His torso shot back up after a moment, and he drew one leg forward so he was in a more tactical kneel, and twisted an arm around to burn on his back, face writhing in a grimace and eyes locked toward each other near his nose. "Raijin struck me in the back, like a coward!" Suenaga spit out the last 3 words with such venom that one of the youths in the front row swooned and had to be carried out by his brothers. Suenaga held his pose while they left, the rest of the men's attention still rapt upon him. Rising and turning deliberately upon his rear heel, Suenaga reached his hands out to the invisible attacker behind him. Before he could make his escape, I caught him by the throat. His upper hand seized an imaginary neck, and by his pine cone. He cupped his lower hand, then crashed it into a fist so viciously that all of the men in the room winced. And I heaved him up and planted him head first beside his foolish kin, Suenaga declared triumphantly. Men and boys cheered all around the room. Suenaga soaked up their praise and shifted languidly from one victory pose to another. As the applause died down, Suenaga turned to the advisors. They looked somewhat more skeptical than the others in the room, but had let him continue anyways. The daimyo cocked a brow at him in challenge when their eyes met, but held his tongue, waiting to see if Suenaga had anything more to say for himself beyond his claims of personal combat prowess. Noting the challenge, Suenaga grinned and turned toward the gallery, holding up his hands to silence the room. He raised his voice once more, this time speaking more solemnly, but still with power and conviction. Because Japan's military skills supersede those of all other nations, our bows and arrows are used with peerless skill, and our armor makes even the gods tremble. The Mongols desire to conquer Japan. Once Japan's warriors are under their control, they will be able to conquer China and India. The country of the Mongols would direct strategy, while Japan would fight in the field for their victory. With the strength of Japan and the Mongols combined, no country could resist. This is why the Mongols now desire to subjugate Japan. Suenaga paused for a moment to ensure he had the eyes of all those present before continuing. But we shall not allow them even a moment's purchase upon the soil of our shores. We shall rain arrows down on them such that they shall not see the sun beyond our shafts. His voice built to a fever pitch as he struck a final valiant pose with his right hand writhing in the air. And I, Takezaki Suenaga, as your Grand Field Marshal General, shall summon the powers of Hujin and Raijin, who I have vanquished this day, and whose essence I have consumed. I shall bring down the mighty kamikaze and smite their ships into the sea. With that, he brought down his fist as if to strike the earth beneath him. Applause, cheering, whooping, hollering, whistling, and war cries erupted from the gallery as Suenaga finished his performance. With that, Suenaga turned to the daimyo and his advisors, holding the gaze of the daimyo and challenging him to contest his claims when every other man in the room had risen to their feet chanting his name. The daimyo simply smirked at him. After a moment more, he rose from his zabuton, giving a slow, exaggerated clap as he advanced towards Suenaga without breaking eye contact. When he reached the warrior, he raised both hands for silence, and the room stilled.
I believe you have all made your decision clear,
the ancient man stated simply with a hint of laughter in his raspy voice.
While his presentation may have been unconventional, there's no denying his fervor and charisma.
Finally drawing his eyes away from Suenaga's, he looked carefully around the room, gauging the emotions of those present.
Should any among you have doubts or reservations about Suenaga's appointment to the post of Grand Field Marshal General, you may voice them now.
Silence reigned in the gallery as Suenaga turned on his heel, rolling back his shoulders and allowing his glistening pectorals to twitch beneath the tatters of his kimono like a pent-up beast.
If If there are no objections, I feel it is safe for us to adjourn for the night.
The daimyo clapped his hands to dismiss the gallery before turning to Suenaga. He held out his hand to gesture toward the rear chambers.
General Takezaki, I realize you must be tired, but if I may have a word in private before you depart.
Retiring to the daimyo's antechamber, the two men sat opposite each other a respectful distance apart. The daimyo began.
Takezaki Suenaga, you are a truly bold man. Your presentation was most impressive.
I thank you for your compliments, Kagesuke-dono. But that is not why you have summoned me to your chamber, is it? Suenaga returned with a hint of apprehension in his smirk.
Indeed it is not, Field Marshal General,
the daimyo replied.
While not taken in by your tale as the others were, after seeing your performance, I cannot deny your worthiness for this task. Do you know why?
Suenaga was unperturbed by the old man's acknowledgement of his farce. However, he was curious why the daimyo seemed to support his claim if he did not believe his tale. Do enlighten me, Kagesuke-dono. I knew very well that you did not believe my claims when I performed the events of this morning for the others, so I must admit to being curious about your apparent support.
First, he chuckled lightly, whether or not I believed you, the others did. Had I voiced my doubts, it would have done little to dispel the images you had already conjured in their minds' eyes. More importantly, though, your tale inspired them. None of your contenders were nearly so charismatic, nor did they light a fire of hope and determination beneath our men's feet in the way your display did.
The daimyo paused and smiled knowingly at Suenaga.
It was as if you believed the tale yourself, and were not merely making up stories to cover your tardiness and embarrassing appearance.
Suenaga refrained from wincing. Instead, he straightened himself even further, spreading his knees in his kiza position and jutting his chin a bit higher in defiance. What makes you so certain my tale was a lie? Can you prove that I did not meet Fujin and Raijin today and defeat both of them in single combat? The daimyo barked out a full-throated laugh.
No, Takezaki-sama. I have no proof. The burn on your back is not clearly from a lantern instead of lightning, and your torn clothes were most certainly ripped apart by the wind, and not torn asunder by your own hands.
He trotted on. Suenaga could barely contain his trembling, rage coursing through him at this old man. Daimyo or no, he had apparently seen right through his facade. The man raised a head placatingly.
Takezaki-sama, I mean you no disrespect. There is no need for hostility between us. To be honest, I am glad that you came and gave your show. I can think of none better to lead our young men into this fight.
The old man's smile warmed Suenaga as he continued.
The Mongols are indeed a fearsome foe, and we will need your divine powers if we are to defeat them.
Suenaga started at this. The old man did not believe his tale, did not believe in his powers, yet now he asked him to use those powers to save them all? You mock me, daimyo, he ground out, trying to hide the bitterness he felt at that moment.
Not at all,
the old man gently returned.
While I may doubt your ability to conjure the elements as you claim, I know that your ability to inspire will make you a legend. If you do perish in battle, your mantle will be passed on to another who will take your name and title as well as your post. Thus shall you not be allowed to die. You will be a legend, even if your flesh rots in the ground.
I will not perish, Kagesuke-dono, Suenaga growled. I will do all I said to the people of Higo, and I shall return with honor, he stated fiercely. Then after a slightly more subdued tone he continued. Other than advancing and having my deeds known, I have nothing else to live for.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 of Inventing Divine Intervention by Alexander Martin. Parts 2 and 3 are in production and should be available soon. In the meantime, please feel free to enjoy some of the other content we have available on the channel. If you would like to read the rest of this story or any of our other series, click the link in the description below. If you enjoy this or any of our content, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to be alerted when more Ominous Harmonies content becomes available.